Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leading differently. I'm Paul Thomas.
And I'm Zoe Amma. Our podcast exists to help leaders and their teams understand what they need to do differently today to prepare for the world of tomorrow. We started Starts at the Top as a podcast about digital disruption, but we soon realised that leaders were telling us about something more important and urgent, about how traditional ways of leading are changing forever.
We make it our mission to speak to leaders who are carving out new ways of leading, covering topics from emerging tech to inclusion, from remote work to mental health and resilience, and from climate change to AI. So if it's about the status of leadership in 2026, it will be on our podcast.
We're not here for the shiny corporate case studies. We share stories from leaders who have learned lessons and made progress the hard way. Our podcast is here to share ideas and inspire others.
And in today's episode, we are sharing our conversation with Eleanor Gibson, who is an agile and innovation coach and founder of Tilt, her business that empowers purpose driven organizations to adapt and innovate.
We called Eleanor just before she went on maternity leave, and we had a lovely conversation covering the importance of focusing on how organisations operate rather than the what. We also talked about the need for collaboration, resilience, and the value of outside support in driving effective change within charities.
And as usual, before we get to the conversation with Eleanor, we want to take a few minutes just to talk about some tech news. And this week, I've been reading some really interesting pieces about, well, this is about more of the existential challenge that's facing us as we all embrace AI into our work lives and our personal lives. This morning on the Six Music BBC News, it was the top story for some reason. I think it just shows you how all pervasive this stuff is. The headline was a story from the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. We will put a link to the article in the show notes, warning that an addiction to instant AI answers could actually make us less intelligent if we start outsourcing too much of our thinking to AI. The director of the observatory talked about the risk that we stop asking questions and checking sources and instead become dependent on tools that gloss over the messy detail underneath. It's interesting because over the weekend, I also read an article in the New York Times, which was written by a student at Stanford University, Theo Baker, who's now a college senior. And Theo described graduating from the first sort of AI era college class, as he described it, and describes how tools like ChatGPT arrived just as they did, just as the students got in the building, and how the tools have quietly reshaped how students learn, collaborate, and even imagine their futures. He talks about AI making some of his fellow students very wealthy, but also about widening inequalities and how the use of AI is altering their habits of thought and thinking in ways they're still trying to understand. He talks about walking to a lecture, for example, and putting the subject of the lecture into ChatGPT on the way to the lecture so that they've got the notes sort of coming to them live. So, Zoe, we talk a lot on this podcast about how, as parents, leaders, and colleagues, we're being forced to grapple with some really quite uncomfortable questions around AI. How do you feel about the dangers of outsourcing too much of our thinking to AI tools?
Well, this is one of the big challenges of our times, isn't it? And I think these two stories really shine a light on how important this issue is. In fact, it's a huge question for all of us who have been in the workplace for a while, and also those coming into the workplace as well, like Theo. I think the story about the Royal Observatory is a really interesting one because the headline sounded quite shocking when I also heard it on Six Music and the Today programme this morning. But actually, when you read the article itself, there's quite a nuanced take in there, isn't it, from the
Yeah.
observatory, where they're actually not saying that AI is bad. They're saying that we need to combine it with critical thinking and humans developing their own insights and having a certain amount of distance from what the tools are telling us. So that I think is really important. And it speaks to the fact that you need to develop your own skills alongside using the skills of these tools. So you need to have that twin track approach to building capabilities on both sides. From my own perspective, and I'd be interested to hear how you tackle this day to day, I find that the way I use AI really fluctuates depending on what I've got going on, but also what I'm particularly focused on and my energy levels as well. So to give you an example of that, I had a week a while back where I found that I was using AI a lot and I was feeling a little bit disconnected from some of the work that I was doing as a result. Not hugely, but I almost felt like I wasn't quite as emotionally invested in it as I
Mm,
normally am. I was still motivated and wanted to make sure it was really, really good, but it felt like I was almost a little bit too dependent on it that particular day. And so I rode back a bit and I decided that I was going to use it a bit less for a few days after that. And I felt much more connected to my work as a result. So I think it's about having that awareness of where you might be getting so reliant on it. It's eroding what you can bring to your work, which is the important thing to keep an eye on.
yeah, I think you're right. And I think it sometimes when you find yourself putting a question into AI and then you think, that doesn't need to be there. So you delete it straight away. I find in that planning with pads of paper and pens tends to help me. I even get laughed at in meetings when I pull out a pad of paper and you say, "Oh, you're meant to be telling us how to innovate with technology and AI, Paul, and here you are with a pen and pencil." But that, for me, really helps me to figure out the most
Mm,
important things that do need to go in there. And for example, working on big data sets and things like that, I'm not quite sure how I did this stuff on my own, and perhaps I didn't do it on my own, is the reality. But
mm.
how you do that stuff on your own without the help of another brain, if you like, and outsourcing some of the heavy lifting to that brain is really important. But I think you're right. I think it's separating the sort of the heavy lifting from the simple questions. Finding time to just sit down and read and research and then figure out what it is that you want to sort of look into next. I do find that with simple tasks sometimes I'm using AI and then discarding the results. So, for example, if I'm trying to make head or tail of something that I'm posting to LinkedIn, or I'm trying to make that point in an email that's not quite reaching where I want it to reach, using AI usually gets me to the point where I see what the answer isn't and it leads me to the
Mm.
answer that is. How about with your kids and the way that they're approaching it, particularly in the classroom? Is that something that you, or outside of the classroom, I guess, not inside the classroom, but is that something that you see and you're aware of? Because I think it is here.
Yeah, yeah. So it really again fluctuates with my kids. And it's interesting because with their schools, actually, one of the reasons why we were quite keen for them to go to their particular schools is that AI was on the curriculum. And I think things have changed a little bit internally. So at my son's school, they're actually not allowed to use AI tools for schoolwork due to age limits, which is quite interesting. But he does use ChatGPT outside of work, and I've helped him a bit with that to make sure that he's safe, he's not putting sensitive data in there, and also how he should be treating the results as well, to your point. And then my daughter does use ChatGPT and some other AI tools as well. And again, I've supported her through how to do that. How about your kids?
Yeah, I think it's task-based stuff that they tend to
Mm,
use it for. I think they're still attending lessons. They're hearing from the teachers, and then they're coming out of those lessons, and some of the investigation that they do around it might be using AI. My eldest tends to use it. I've got two boys, and the eldest is tending to use it for some of the stuff that he needs to do outside of school.
mm.
So he used the AI within Canva, for example, to pull together a CV, which was a good first draft. He's
Oh,
used it to look at a sort of a variety of covering letters for that CV, and things like that, just to help him get that foothold because he's not done this stuff before. So
of
having an
course.
example is something that's really, really important. And whereas I guess you and I might have turned to our parents to say, "Can you help me with this? I've never seen what does a covering letter need to
Mm,
include?" They've now got a wealth of options out there that can sort of point them down the right route. So I think that sort of thing's really important. And then just a reflection on this weekend. Sorry, last week he's been doing the Duke of Edinburgh practice for his proper Duke of Edinburgh in July, and they went away with the school to the Peak District for 4 nights. And what was interesting there was he had to put his phone in a box and give it to his teachers. And I think he thrived on that. I mean, we didn't get any messages back, so we were having the heebie-jeebies, not knowing where he was at all times. But I think he really benefited from it and came back very, very chatty, full of the joys of life on Saturday. A bit knackered and his legs ached, but his time away from his phone, I think, had really helped him.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, maybe that's the skill we should be teaching to young people. And your Stanford article was really interesting. I think my main reflection on it was this is obviously a very, very privileged group of students, right, who've got
Hmm.
ready access to technology and to resources and to skills. And you could argue that that bleeds into a sense of entitlement. It does make me think again about the difference that where you're educated. And I think there's something here about class, unfortunately, that makes a really big difference as well. I remember a while back, I went in to present to some chairs of university audit and risk subcommittees and just looking at what's going on in universities and schools and also what's not happening in some universities and schools around AI. I mean, this is where your privilege in this day and age originates from as much as what your parents do and how expensive the house you live in is. Because I think if you can be accessing these tools early on and you get guidance and support in how to do it, that's going to really put you ahead. So that for me was the thing that I really took away from the article about how this is going to deepen inequalities.
Yeah, particularly in those types of courses. I mean, the outlook he shares is one of the ambition for the people on the course moving from sort of almost zero to billionaire within a 3 or 4 year time frame.
Yeah,
They're
no
looking
need
at
for
the
a grad scheme.
opportunities.
Yes.
Exactly. They're looking at the opportunities that are open to them. They're getting visiting lectures from these AI mega corporations, and that's the path that they're seeing.
Mm,
Versus, somebody that doesn't have that exposure is probably not going to see that world. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's the point that was being made at the end of the article seemed to be this realization that actually I don't want to be guided from it by it in that
mm,
way. I don't want to be guided along this path that we've set for ourselves within that community of people. But it was really interesting, and I think it's a very interesting read that we will share in the show notes, and people can make up their own minds and share their opinions. There is a common thread here that tells us that whilst there's a lot to look at with shiny use cases for AI within organizations, we also need to really pay attention to the human side of AI and where the technology is taking us. I was in a room of people last week where we were talking, two or three people in the room were talking about those big sort of use cases that might change the way that that business worked. And yet on the other side of the table, you had people that were still questioning their entry point to the world of AI and looking at it very much on a sort of a personal use case basis, still plotting travel itineraries and things through AI. So I think there's a real sense for me that we've got to keep that in mind, understand where the technology is taking us, and make sure that we hold empathy and critical thinking dear when the answer to nearly everything we want to know is just one prompt away.
sure. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so whether you're a CEO, a charity leader, a public sector innovator, or just someone trying to make sense of AI in your own life, do stick with us over on Starts at the Top. We may not have the answers, but at least we can apply a bit of critical thinking together. And that is a great start. So now for a conversation with Eleanor Gibson. We are super excited to have Eleanor Gibson on the podcast today. From community fundraiser to pioneering Agile coach, Eleanor's journey began at Cancer Research UK, where she witnessed firsthand how conventional ways of working could stifle fundraising innovation and resilience. She discovered Agile and lean ways of working and made it her mission to bring this fresh thinking to the charity sector. Today, Eleanor leads Tilt, where she and a team of agile coaches guide charities to work differently to deliver greater impact. Over 40 charities have embedded new ways of working to become quicker to respond, raise more funds, and achieve stronger outcomes for their causes. Eleanor's work challenges old assumptions about how charities should operate. She believes that as a sector, we must challenge ourselves to grapple with difficult questions to enable ourselves to have the impact we truly want to. Eleanor, it's such a joy to have you on Start to the Top. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Really excited about this conversation.
And I absolutely loved your bio, by the way, because it was all about what you do and how you do it rather than Eleanor's done this list of amazing job titles. Although obviously you clearly have that as well. But it was brilliant. I really feel like I've got an even stronger sense of the story of who you are.
I think that story is important because that's what we at Tilt are asking other people, folks across the charity sector and purpose-led sector to do, is to trust us to walk with them. I feel it's important for me to show that I've been on that journey too and where that learning has come from. So yeah, it feels important to share it from that perspective rather than just some snazzy job titles, like you said, which are fun.
Snazzy job titles are fun, and they're fun to share and they're fun to sit behind. Tilt as an organisation, your main opportunities are with charities, and you help them how to figure out and rethink not just what they do, but how they work, which resonates with us and the conversations that we're having. In fact, I just wrote about something like this morning in accountancy firms where I tend to spend a lot of time. What's the sort of the biggest shift in that how? What are the things that you've done over the course of the existence of your business that have really led you to those biggest shifts and changes?
Yeah, that focus on how is really powerful and something that can often be overlooked. And that's what we aim to support organisations and particularly leaders to focus on at Tilt. We certainly within the sort of purpose driven sector, it can be really clear our why. Why are we here? Why do we exist? And the what do we do can be fairly well established. If we run these fundraising campaigns, we fund this research, and how we work to deliver that can often be overlooked. And in our experience and our opinion, that can be where there can be huge unlocks. And the focus on technology and AI increases, there's even more of an opportunity to focus on how we work together, how we make decisions, how we prioritize, how we collaborate is ever more vital and ever more at risk of getting lost, I would say. We often find ourselves in long conversations about how are we making this decision? How are we prioritizing what we work on? And that's what we really love to support.
And I really love that point because as someone who, like you, often works alongside very experienced leaders, I actually also love working with emerging leaders because they have it built into their operating system, really thinking through the how of what they're doing rather than, I don't want to say going through the motions, but I think we've all been in situations, haven't we, as leaders, when you've done something several times, almost going on to a bit of an autopilot type of approach. So in terms of that agility and thinking about how as a leader you can ask those questions on the how and you can make your organization gradually evolve into one that is more agile. And Paul obviously mentioned AI there and looking to the future. How can leaders best help their organizations get into that MO of adapting and future fit and dealing with constant change without burning out and without compromising on purpose? What would you recommend there to leaders?
That's the big question. And we have a model that we use at Tilt, which we can link to, which is 5 mindset shifts. This was originally developed by ThoughtWorks. We at Tilt have adapted it for the nonprofit sector, but it's absolutely applicable in the accountancy world and more widely. But we see these 5 mindset shifts that if leaders both embody them themselves and encourage their teams to, that sets them up to be able to leverage all of the and adapt positively to all of the change that's happening around them. So that first shift is shifting from a focus on outputs towards a focus on outcomes. So it can be really overwhelming. The opportunities that are available to us, for example, through engaging with AI, it can be really alluring to think of all the things that we can build, all the tools, all the new stuff we can do. And we work with leaders to encourage them to think about what outcome do you and your team and your organization want to achieve, and focus and prioritize and drive towards that. And that will involve deprioritizing lots of stuff, saying no to lots of things. And that is part of how you can avoid burnout and enable adaptability. What do we want to be different because we've done this work? That's the question that we always ask. What do you want to be different? And that helps to focus on the difference that you'd like to make and helps you to clear the way of some of those less important things that can bog us down. So that's the first shift that we see leaders doing, the ones that are really enabling adaptability. The second one is shifting from hierarchies to networks. Rather than information and decisions flowing through hierarchies, instead, information and decisions taking place within a more networked environment. So that's particularly important when we talk about AI, where there's a risk within organizations of knowledge being fragmented, that institutional knowledge being lost as everybody goes off and interacts with AI in a different way, perhaps learning being siloed. Shifting towards a leadership style and a way of working that brings people together in networks can really ensure that institutional knowledge and that therefore that adaptability stays within the organization.
It's interesting because I work within a very hierarchical structure, I guess, where the partners lead an organization into the future. But sometimes the disconnect is between it's an us and them mentality, really. The partners sort of leading the organization, making the choices and the decisions, and the rest of the employees sort of accepting that as fact and moving with it. And what we time and time again encourage them to do is to sit with employees, particularly around something like AI training, and actually see how that plays out for the people within your organization. That becomes really important, doesn't it, to just make sure that everyone is connected and involved in that way. But our structures for decades have been built around these hierarchies that are really just hard to push through sometimes.
Yeah. And certainly our experience is that technology and AI makes it even more important to listen to those folks who are on the ground doing the work. Change is happening so quickly. Opportunities are coming out so much more quickly. So it's ever more important to have that feedback loop, not only for information to flow top down, but to be flowing bottom up as well, and ideally across the organization, which is certainly something that can be a struggle within charities. You know, you might have your fundraising team, your communications team, your marketing team, and actually getting the information flowing between them, where historically it might have been fast enough to have your leaders speaking to each other. Things are happening so quickly now that you really need your teams to have those relationships, to be speaking together, to be empowered to make decisions and sharing that information. The decision-making capability that used to make sense to sit at the top because those decades worth of experience were important are becoming less valuable as technology drives ever faster change, whereas it's often the folks on the ground who have that insight that really needs to be brought into decision making.
We've talked about this, Zoe, haven't we? We started a podcast called Starts at the Top, and then we sort of said maybe it should be called Starts at the Top, Bubbles Up from the Bottom. But innovation happens at the edges as well. So it is that sort of sense of the network within the organisation I think you're really nurturing there.
Yeah, and that's something we talk about a lot at Tilt, is that transformation at an organizational level, or change, any kind of change at an organizational level, in our experience, it needs both top-down change and bottom-up change. There's only so far you can get with either one. While leadership can nurture that bottom-up change, whether it's delivering projects in a new way or empowering voices on the ground, it does really need both. Otherwise, it reaches a ceiling or gets stuck either way. So yeah, that's definitely our experience too.
And that's really exciting, thinking about how data and insight and different experiences kind of flow around an organization. And it strikes me that the work you're doing around that and these mindset shifts you talk about, it's a new way of operating for a lot of leaders, isn't it? Do you ever come across leaders where they feel a bit nervous, they feel a bit uncomfortable about how they might need to lead differently to make that kind of change happen?
Absolutely. We often say if it's not feeling uncomfortable, you're not doing it right. Discomfort is part of it. And it's really, thank you for naming that, Zoe. This is countercultural. It isn't just about tweaking your processes. What we're asking leaders to do, or what the environment now is asking of us as leaders, is to fundamentally challenge the way we work out our value and what the value is that we bring in our roles and to our organizations, where previously it might have been decisiveness, decades of experience, having the answer, having the connections, perhaps. More and more, it becomes about asking the right questions, coaching, connecting, facilitating. And that's a huge shift. And it is understandably very uncomfortable. It can sometimes feel like, well, what's my role then? If I'm powering my team to make decisions, what's my role? If I'm not directing, where am I adding value? So it is a really fundamental shift that we're asking folks to do. And that does come with discomfort. What we found helps with that is a few things. Firstly, starting small, starting with whether it's a project or a piece of work or a particular team or a particular interaction, and starting to try out some new ways of working there. Also building a network of other people who are trying these different ways of working so that you can feel connected and supported. Having somebody walk next to you as you do it, a coach, case studies from others who have shifted, and connecting to why you're doing it. So some organizations are, actually come to this when their back's against the wall, when they're like, change needs to happen, otherwise we're not going to be here in X amount of time, or where there is a crisis or significant change is needed. But yeah, it is uncomfortable, and naming that is an important part of what we see ourselves as here to do, not minimizing it, and instead saying, yeah, it's really uncomfortable and it's vital. This is our work to do.
Presumably, as a leader, you need that kind of foundation of confidence and resilience to really push through that uncomfortableness, I'm going to call it, to reach for that really exciting change, that new way of doing things that you've described. What would you advise leaders about how they can build that sustainable strength, that resilience, so they get comfortable with this kind of far-reaching change we're seeing with AI and everything else going on?
In our experience, it is about connecting to why shifting your approach is important. So understanding what difference you'd like it to make, whether it is that you need to do more with less, whether it is a particularly challenging financial goal, whether it is that actually your organization won't be here in a couple of years or won't be able to have the impact that it has otherwise without it. Connecting to that why can really drive that resilience. As I said, starting small. So it might be an area of work or a particular team where your background is, that you might say, okay, I'm going to try leading this differently. I'm going to try leading this in a more empowered, experimental, transparent way within this tight box where I feel fairly comfortable. And then I can see how it feels before stepping outwards more. Sometimes we find leaders working within their leadership team, focusing on new ways of working as a leadership team, can build that resilience because you're doing it together. You have that group of people who are also on that journey, feeling that discomfort, and that you're doing it together. As I said before, having a coach to guide, to work with you through that. This is something that evolves step by step over 6, 9, 12, 18 months, over the years. So that's certainly where we find folks can get a huge amount of value, is being supported as they embed new ways of working day to day. It's not a big bang type shift. Instead, nudging themselves to try different things is the best way to do it in a way that supports that resilience rather than sort of degrading it. Because it's so important with so much change happening. resilience is crucial.
We describe what we do as side by side working, and that involves coaching. Sometimes it involves mentoring, but it's what I've found more forthcoming recently is that sort of understanding that they probably do need to look outside of the organization to get some of that support and some of that help. And you've mentioned it already, whether it's from a peer that's been through a similar change or a similar strategic shift or something like that they can look to and point to and say, that's where we want to go. Or whether it's somebody bringing in some of that experience, which is good for consultants, I guess, to be in that position. But I think I've noticed that as a shift in my industry or an industry I serve, certainly over the last couple of years, is a much more readiness to look outside and start to ask those questions rather than try and solve everything internally.
That's brilliant to hear. Certainly, I get really excited when we're working with a non-profit and they're connecting with other non-profits, but even more excitingly, others in other areas, in other sectors, because there is so much that we can learn from each other. Yeah, as you said, Paul, just having someone who has walked that path before you or is a step ahead. So a lot of what we do at Tilt is convening people. It's also I'm part of the Charity Change Collective, which is often running events to bring together, we call it change ready leaders, folks within the non-profit world who are keen to drive change within their organisation and are keen to connect with others who want to do the same or hear the kind of aggregated reflections from other leaders. So yeah, it's brilliant to hear that that's also happening in your world, because the more that we can get that kind of external input, the better. And the more we can look outside of our sectors, so we're not just looking over our shoulder and seeing something similar, the better, in my opinion.
You're ticking all the starts at the top boxes, aren't you, here? So you've got the starts at the top, bubbles up from the bottom, and now you're hitting the cross-sector sharing. You're really hitting all the sweet spots for us today.
I'm glad to hear it. I also wanted to talk you through the other three of the mindset shifts, if that's okay. What we also see great leaders doing is shifting from a controlling approach to an empowering approach. It's something that I imagine you're hearing a lot in your conversations, but really breaking that down into how leaders can build up their teams, coach their teams, facilitate their teams to step up, to make decisions without them, to connect the dots, to have the space to innovate and collaborate, rather than this kind of old school command and control approach, which works well when things are moving slowly, but the faster things move, the more you need your team, your organization to be empowered to, whether it's newsjacking, responding to the news very, very quickly on social media in a way that will get your supporters, get you sort of on the front pages, all the way through to trusting them to run an experiment quickly when the time is right. So that's the third shift that we encourage leaders to think about. The fourth is moving from predicting to experimentation. This is one of my biggest loves. I was enjoying listening to your podcast episode with Ali Poole from last season, and how Ali was talking a lot about the importance at Flow, the healthcare app, of experimentation. And that's certainly something that we see some of the most adaptable, resilient, I guess, leaders who are really harnessing technology using is an experimentation approach, not just experimenting around the products they're trying or the strategies they're embedding externally, but also having the confidence to experiment in the way that they lead, in the way that their meetings look, in the way that they interact or make decisions. So that's something that I get really excited about, because that's my background. And the final mindset shift is moving from isolation to transparency. So we've talked about that a little bit already, rather than us focusing on kind of I protecting the thoughts and the approaches of our particular organization or even sector, and instead looking outwards, looking to connect and say, what can we learn from different sectors? How can we collaborate? Sharing intel, sharing data, both within organizations. That's certainly still a challenge in many of the larger charities, is the silos between different in different departments, but also more widely, as you said, Paul, it's brilliant to see the two of you, Zoe and Paul, seeing how much synergy there is across different sectors. So where can we do that more? Those are the 5 mindset shifts that in our experience is what enables leaders to leverage AI and in a resilient, adaptable way.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting, isn't it? And do you think with that adoption of AI that you're seeing amongst the leaders that you work with, is there anything really specific around that shift to using AI more? Perhaps anything new or surprising that you haven't seen previously in your career? Because it feels like such a big change for the sector, doesn't it?
It does. And we focus less on, I guess, the how and the what's being built with AI. And what we're finding particularly interesting is hearing from leaders and organizations about that overlap between AI and ways of working. And what we're seeing is there are some real opportunities there. So there are some teams, for example, that are using AI scrum masters who will sort of enabling sharing questions with teams, facilitating teams to reflect on how they're working and how they might work better together. So some kind of productivity focus. But we're also seeing leaders and organizations thinking much bigger about the opportunities that AI and the challenges that AI poses around their ways of working. So as I was touching on earlier, what we're seeing at some organizations is that where teams are using AI to drive productivity, there is institutional knowledge getting lost. There is much larger opportunity for silos to build up because you can kind of run with an idea without actually, comms don't need to check in with fundraising. They're interacting with AI and coming up with fundraising ideas for themselves. So it can be very easy for things to run away without that collaboration happening. So some of the organizations that we see who are harnessing AI really well are the ones who are being thoughtful about how it overlaps with ways of working as well, to make sure that they're avoiding those kind of pitfalls and that they're building habits that retain collaboration, that retain that collective learning. So trying to balance empowering teams to just go and have a go and see what it can do for them, while also creating those networks and opportunities for people to be sharing what they're learning and building relationships and ensuring collaboration continues to happen.
It's like it could be quite an exciting time for the sector, doesn't it, if we get this right?
Absolutely. I think the challenge is that it's not clear what getting it right looks like, or what getting it right looks like keeps changing as the technology keeps improving. And I guess that's why I get so excited about focusing on how we work, because I believe if we can get sharing, empowering, experimenting, collaborating, if we are focused on the outcomes, then whatever comes next in terms of the next leap forward in AI, we can adapt to it. And that's, yeah, as I said, what gets me really excited about focusing on, particularly on agile ways of working, is that it sets us up to be resilient as leaders, as organizations, because we can say, okay, I have no idea what we'll be delivering, when, with who, and what it will look like. But what I can tell you is that we will be running regular experiments. We will be doing it as part of a small cross-functional team, that we will be making decisions based on data, that we will be involving our leaders in XYZ ways, so that it gives us something to hold on to, something that does remain the same. It's a kind of process, or it's some steps, it's some principles that can, and habits that can ground us and that will enable us to navigate our way through this ever more speedy change that's happening to us and around us.
I was going to say that's going to be my reflection actually, and what I think I'm hearing from you is, despite the sort of the speed that everything is changing at, despite the runaway nature of AI and where it's taking us, those leaders that jump in and really try to go with the flow are the ones that are going to win. It's almost become the great leveler, hasn't it? And it's refreshing, I think, for Zoe and I and you and others that walk into organizations to feel that, yes, we're going to contribute something from the experience that we have and the work that we've done in the past. But also, it's a very level playing field. We don't have all the answers. We are going to have to work together to bring them out of the people that we're, and the teams that we're working with. That's a real shift, and an uncomfortable one, I guess, for some consultants and people that are assisting these organisations.
Yeah, I also see it as being a real leveler across size of organisations. I see some incredible organisations like Together Co, a small loneliness charity based down in Brighton, who are really embracing the use of AI in all, not just in terms of productivity, but in terms of how they deliver their impact, in terms of how they apply for grants. And that because they are a smaller organisation, they're much quicker to try things, learn what works, build a kind of agreed approach across the organization, where some larger and they're flying, it's enabling them to try all sorts of things they wouldn't have had the capacity to do otherwise. They've even started looking into they've started training other small charities in how to leverage AI. Could that be a new funding channel? I see much larger, more traditional organizations struggling to articulate a basic policy around AI, for example, and to know how to approach deciding where to deploy it first. So I think it's also a leveler in terms of giving an opportunity to those smaller organizations to suddenly have so much opportunity open up and the ability to move faster, perhaps leapfrog some of those larger organizations.
I love that idea. What a really inspiring note to end on, because I think that is such an important thing, isn't it? To think about where actually you don't need to be a huge organization to do all of this, right? You just need to be really focused, I think, and very intentional is my big takeaway from everything you've said. Is that right?
Absolutely. And yeah, for me, the top takeaway or the thing that I'm hoping folks will take away is being intentional about how you work is super important. If you want to leverage all the opportunities and avoid all the pitfalls that are coming at us ever more quickly with speed of technology, yeah, being intentional about how you work is key.
Really love that. And that feels like such a golden thread through everything you do, Eleanor. I love the way that you're clearly keeping organizations on the straight and narrow with that.
We're doing our best. And there's so many organizations out there doing incredible work, really brave decision making, trying new things. It can be very tough. And leaders as well, as we touched on, it takes bravery and confidence to challenge how you're used to working. And it's really exciting to see lots of organisations in our sector and more widely giving it a go and seeing the opportunities that come from focusing on how and working differently.
Really love that. And if people want to find out more about what Tilt do, Eleanor, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you can come and find us at teamtilt.co.uk. We also have a Where to Start with Agile Ways of Working workbook, which folks can use to, if they're keen to explore whether or where a more agile approach to ways of working might help them. It's a workbook that can help them to think through where they might start with that. You can also find us on LinkedIn as well. Either search for me or Tilt.
Amazing. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Eleanor. Please do ping over those links and we can include them in the show notes.
Thank you very much. It was a great conversation. I think our listeners are going to be really pleased to spend some time with you as well, as much as we have. So thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure. Thank you for
Thank
having me.
you. Many thanks to Eleanor for joining us on the podcast. I really enjoyed our discussion and we're very grateful to her for making the time for us just ahead of her life-changing moment and the birth of her baby. Congrats, Eleanor. It's lovely news.
Yes, many thanks to Eleanor and congratulations from us at Starts at the Top. As always, we really do appreciate that you've listened all the way through to the end of the episode. Thank you very much for doing so. You can support our podcast by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to us. It really does help us to reach more people. So if you've enjoyed what you've heard, do share it with a colleague or a friend.
Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode of Starts at the Top.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.